Hello everybody, it's lovely to be here to share my MA research, The Ethics of Inclusion, with lots of people, with people who are participants, with people from Leicester Diocese, with people who've been involved or heard about it from participants, or perhaps they've been interested in what I've been doing. So thank you so much for sharing. I can see we've got quite a lot of people around. Yeah, I've just managed to lose my connection on my phone, which I'm trying to run alongside. Anyway, I'm Penny. I'm about to do some presentations, but it'd be great to know who you are if you're joining us. We've got quite a lot of people on the line from all over the place. So do say hello, let us know where you're from in the comments if you'd like to. This webinar is going out via YouTube, so please be assured that nobody can see you or hear you. So I know many of the participants will be quite tired at the end of the day, so I hope that you're taking it very gently. Yes, and please do, let's make this participative. So if you do have questions or comments, please do add them at the bottom of the comments at the bottom of the screen, because it'd be lovely to hear from you. So I do have quite a few slides. I'll take you through those in a moment, but first of all, let's just see where people are from. So I can see that we've got Les down the road, not far away from me, who's been here for half an hour. Ruth, and I think South Coast, is it now? We've got Rachel from Cumbria, and Samantha, and Lo from York, Alison McDowd down the road, Christine from Glasgow, and Ruth from Swanage. There we are. I thought it was South Coast. So, and I'm sure that there are many others as well. So, yes. Yep, okay. So let's, and Samantha from Shropshire, and lots of others, I'm sure. So I'm wanting to make this interactive. If you've got any questions about what comes up, there will be a slight delay between you asking your question and me seeing it, but I'd be very happy to respond as we go through. So let me bring up the slides. Now hopefully I'm not blocking it and I'm over in the corner. Hello David, I can see you as well, that you've joined in, which is great. So hopefully you can see the slides, and I'm still here but quite little in the corner, and I will be scribbling on the slides to help show things as we go. Right, so let's just a recap. This study was my MA study, and it's called The Ethics of Inclusion. I was really interested as to how people with invisible illnesses and chronic conditions, things like ME and long COVID, how they felt, whether they felt they belonged in their church communities. And I've specifically focused on people of working age, because I wanted to pick up invisible illnesses rather than those which generally develop later on in older age. So let's dive in. And the first thing I'll look at is, well, why on earth would you want to do this? So here's my why. You can see over there, hang on, wrong direction, over there, a picture of my husband Malcolm, and he has had ME for 34 and a half now years. And he's had some quite difficult experiences of lack of belonging in churches, and people not really understanding, and some problems. And I wondered, is this a more general hidden problem that happens in churches more generally, or is it just happening to us? So a few years ago, just as I suppose a year and a half into the COVID pandemic, we were invited by the Church Times to write something about what's it like having a long-term health condition and being involved in church. And we both wrote things from our perspective. If anyone's interested, I can send you a link. Just send me an email afterwards. So, and we wrote this, and I mentioned at the end of my article, I'm doing an MA, so maybe I'll look into the reaction to ME in churches, and I had a response from loads of people saying, please do this, please do this. Yeah. Okay, so I did. Let's just have a quick look. Those of you with these illnesses won't need to know anything about them, but there's some people, maybe some people haven't come across these. So ME, as you can see, is a complex chronic medical condition affecting multiple body systems. You may have heard about it in the news recently because somebody died of it and there was an inquest. So it can be very serious, but despite that, it's often not taken seriously, even by doctors. And as we'll find out, by some people in churches. Then, of course, the next one, I need to get out of the way a little bit. Okay, well, if you look for WHO for long COVID, you'll find this link at the bottom. But long COVID is this new version of a post-viral illness, and that has is something that happens when people don't get better after they've had an initial COVID infection. And we know that there are quite a lot of people with this, and it can be really debilitating. And in fact, I think about half of the people with long COVID are diagnosed with ME. So let's keep going and having a look at those. So the latest information on long COVID is that there are about 2 million people living with self-reported long COVID and you can see them by age here. And you can see it affects working age most of all, and particularly sort of 45 to 64 was where they had a peak. Like many things, it seems to be worse if you're female, you're more likely to have long COVID. And the thing about long COVID is that the numbers are going up. They're not going down. This isn't something that happened at the very beginning of the pandemic and has since stopped. There are still people getting long COVID today. So do pop in questions or comments. Right, so let's have a look at the study. That was a bit of background. So I started off with putting something on a website, ethicsofinclusion.study. It's still there if you're interested. And these were the boundaries of the study, if you like. I'm going to start scribbling on the screen if I can get the mouse to go to the right place. Okay, all right, I'm going to put. So there are a few things. There we are. So first of all, people had to have an invisible illness or chronic condition. And particularly if it was something along the lines of ME or long COVID or immune compromise due to chemotherapy, something like that. They also had to be a member of a Church of England community now, or perhaps they had, been a member of that and were now very much on the fringes. People needed to be of working age, so between 18 to 65, and I chose that because the pension age is 66. And they had to be able to complete a survey online themselves, which probably cut out some of the worst, most severely affected people. So, and they then carried on down the webpage and answered a survey. And I had over 60 people do that, which is lovely. And I think some of you are on the call, which is great. So what happened? I did the survey in January. So you can see quite early in the year here, the survey. I then did a whole load of interviews around June and at the same time looked at the literature. So I didn't have a sort of a plan up front of how I was going to explore this. I wanted that to emerge as I was doing the interviews. I then did some analysis and wrote it up for the MA. That's all done. And I now need to write it up for lots of other publications, including a sociology textbook. Who would have thought it? Anyway, so that's what's happened. I had a survey with more than 60 people. I interviewed 13 people. And as you can imagine, there was huge, enormous volumes, hundreds and hundreds of pages of transcripts and quotes from people. So what I did was I did something called coding. So do let me know if you've got any comments or questions. It's gone quite quiet in the chat. I had 50 different codes. These are little things that I marked. Things like "you look well" if somebody mentioned that as a comment, or perhaps they were a church worker or PCC member or a priest. I flagged things like exclusion or frustration, whether their gifts or ministry was used, whether they had to stand and no allowances were made, or other illnesses were valued more. So I had 50 different codes like this, and obviously this one here, great quotes, was just things that I thought were brilliant that I marked that might be useful for highlighting as quotes. So let's move on and see what came out of all of these 50 different codes, because they all needed to be brought together in some way. Well, actually, I was completely shocked, and I suspect you might be as well, by the themes that emerged. The first set are the challenging ones, and we will go through some examples of what people said about each of these. But the first one was, "I'm valued for what I do, not who I am." Then, "rotas are a nightmare." Second theme. Third theme, "church harms." This is shocking. And there were examples of physical, mental, spiritual harm and emotional harm. I'm treated differently from others, and here I'm thinking particularly people with ME, long COVID, being treated differently from people with, say, cancer or a visible disability. And then the thing that I found most heartrending was, "I have disappeared," which was a quote said by one of the interview participants. And when I mentioned it to others, half of the people I interviewed said, "Yes, that's true for me as well." And that was quite shocking. So I'm going to just pause for a moment and say, please do put into the chat what your thoughts are about these challenging themes. There are also 3 positive themes which are coming up, but these are quite challenging. There is a slight time delay, so I'm going to start moving on, but I'll be interested in your comments. So here are a couple of participant comments from "I'm valued for what I do, not who I am." Yeah, the elegantly named P30, because I kept things anonymous, said, "There's a lot of pressure in church. You only seem valued if you do stuff. And if you have an invisible illness or chronic condition, there will be times, maybe all the time, when you can't do stuff. And then maybe you're not valued, or not as much as if you were able to do things." Somebody said, "I'm of no value to the church as I'm not well enough to volunteer." I've just picked up Christine's comment. "I feel deeply moved by all these themes, and I recognise my own experience. I too have disappeared since developing ME." I'm really sorry to hear that, Christine. But again, the themes are resonating. Yep. When they first came out, I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe I was somehow biasing it, but it's interesting. Right. So yeah, Madeline's bringing up an interesting point, saying the harms appear to be similar to those experienced by people with disabilities in general, and also people experiencing mental health challenges. Absolutely. I excluded mental health challenges and things like autism from this survey because I wanted it to focus specifically on physical invisible illnesses. And we'll see in a moment how these things are different from people with disabilities that are visible. But let's keep going. Rotas are a nightmare. So the last one was, I'm valued for what I do, not who I am. And this rotas one seems to be similar. Valued for what I do, not what I am. Let's go back to that one. This one is very much related to our culture. If you think back to the Protestant work ethic, we think that's perhaps where it's come from. But the UK and the US have a culture where people are valued for what you do. You get asked, what do you do if you meet people? What do you do? And I think that churches have swallowed this hook, line and sinker. Because in churches, it shouldn't be about what we do that we're valued for, but who we are and the fact we're made in the image of God, which is fascinating. Anyway, but if we're valued for what we do, then actually rotas are a key part of how churches organise what we do. And what came across from the interviews and from the surveys is that rotas were especially difficult. Let's listen to a couple of those comments from people. So participant P30 said, people say we won't bother because she's unreliable. She's a bit all over the place. If you have a fluctuating illness, you cannot predict whether you're going to be well enough to fulfill a rota, to do a reading, or to lead the intercessions or something in church. But survey participant number 7 said, I never know whether I'm going to feel okay or not, so I don't like to commit to things, so I don't get as involved as I might otherwise, and I feel less included. So rotas, as they are currently in churches, are a nightmare. Something that I have tried out with a friend from church who has a fluctuating condition. I asked her, would you like to just step in and read if you're having a good day? And she nearly burst into tears, and then I nearly did as well, because she said yes, she'd love to be able to do things, but she can't commit that she will be well enough. Interestingly, one of the people undergoing chemotherapy, number 6, because nobody has names, she felt very included by her church, but she also found rotas were a nightmare, because there was one Sunday when she was due to preach, and at 5:30 a.m. she had to be rushed into A&E with an infection. So you can't predict that. So fluctuating. Think in your church, if you have people with fluctuating conditions, which you probably will do, how can you make your rotas a little bit more flexible? Perhaps people willing to step aside, or perhaps having an empty rota that could be filled on the day. This one was one of the tricky ones. Church harms, physically, mentally, spiritually, and I probably ought to add emotionally as well. Here are some examples of the many things that I found in the survey. All I want to do is cry all the way through the service because I'm in so much pain. This is somebody who now tends to join by online church because being in church physically is so painful, excruciatingly painful for her. Participant P35 said there's no safe inclusion for people with chronic illnesses, and she was speaking of COVID infections in church. A number of people in the survey of the interview, actually a number of interviewees said that they had picked up COVID in church. Somebody sat next to somebody who said, oh, I'm recovering from COVID, coughing like mad, and a couple of days later she went down with COVID and was ill for months and hasn't regained the baseline level of health that she had when she picked up that particular COVID infection. Another way that church harms, here's a survey participant saying people disbelieving me and continually praying for my healing and telling me to repent. It affected me so much emotionally, I really believe God hated me. And this is not an isolated quote. A lot of people flippantly are well and say, oh well, all you have to do is pray. And if you are not healed, then there's something wrong with you. They probably don't say that, but they imply it. There are lots of quotes like that. So church harms, and that's hard as somebody who is reader in a church to face up to, which is why this is so important. I think why all the people who have shared their stories, it's so important that we share these beyond. I'm treated differently from others, and this is something that I can show you later, some quantitative information about if you'd like to see it. And this relates to what Madeline was saying about it seems to be similar to those experienced by people with disabilities in general. And participant P30 is saying people find it easier to cope when they can see some outward sign or something. Because people with long COVID and ME often look completely healthy, but they can feel really ill inside. Yep. Participant 36 said, when they try and include me, I feel different as it's always a special effort that feels a trouble. Participant 20 was talking about people how her church treat people very differently, those with visible disabilities. They've been good with them, but terrible with me. Some people talked about, if you have cancer, there's a cancer club, and people bring in people bring meals to you for weeks on end. But if you have ME and it goes on for years and years and years, it's easy to fall off the radar. Madeline's just commented, you can see a broken leg, but you can't see long COVID. Yes, absolutely. And often people look very healthy, and so it's stigmatized. Oh, perhaps they're just lazy or whatever. Yep. Yeah. We've got some comments coming through. So Alison's saying about she liked the whole thing about rotas being prepared to step aside. It's a bit like people being able and willing to step in at the last minute for rotas. Yep. If someone's unable to read or pray, leaders or preachers will step in, or wardens ask others. Yeah, perhaps you could ask some people who have fluctuating illnesses if they'd like to step in at the last minute, perhaps for reading or praying if the intercessions have already been written. Okay, let's keep going. Yeah, this one is a heartbreaker, really. Participant P35 said to me in the interview, in the survey, I have disappeared. I'm out of sight. I feel I've been abandoned. Out of sight, out of mind. Yep. I was close to tears reading some of these and talking to people. Participant 33 told me another thing, that live streaming was taken away. It's interesting. When COVID hit, suddenly churches started doing things that included many people who were really on the fringes because of invisible illnesses. Suddenly they were equal, there was a level playing field. And then gradually, as things have gone back to closer to normal, things have stopped. One church, one person said, my morning prayer, daily online community was stopped because they wanted to focus the Facebook page more on advertising events than supporting an online praying community that included people who were excluded. Okay. Participant 34 was told that she can't go on the home communion list because the home communion rota people are too busy looking after all the older people who need it, implying that she didn't need it. So she's stuck at home, no communion, and somebody who used to minister in that church. Lots of comments coming through. So people are inspired by how you can manage rotas, stepping in and approaching people on the day. And Madeline saying how you ask is important. So perhaps don't ask people for the first time when you have the gap. Perhaps have a chat with people beforehand and find out would they like to be asked occasionally. Alison's going to report back to the PCC and the Rota Supremo, which is great news. Okay. So I have disappeared. There are many people who've disappeared. So perhaps in your churches, think about those people who haven't come back to church after, well, since they disappeared at some point during the COVID lockdowns and so on. Check up on people. Have some of them fallen out and disappeared? Some of the examples in the research included somebody who'd been a teacher, a key teacher in a Church of England village school, who had been a key person keeping the church and the school connected and managing things during lockdowns, got long COVID after the lockdowns and has hardly been contacted at all by church, having been a key person. Another was a church administrator who got long COVID and has hardly been contacted. So yeah, do check up on people. So there are some positive ones. So I hope these are encouraging and give you some ideas. So online can really help. Leadership really matters. How leaders are, what they say makes a massive difference. And then people also described what church could be. Lots of really wonderful ideas and thoughts about how church could be very different. So, yeah. We've got a comment about somebody offering to be a backup for someone else on a rota. So that if they're unwell, they can have a backup. Yes, brilliant. Les also talks about grief. Yeah. Oh gosh, people having been told, pull yourself together. Lots of powerful messages coming, says Madeline. Also powerful messages from the comments. So online can really help. This was someone describing what it was like when in March 2020, when they could suddenly take part. They were no longer excluded. They were unexcluded. They were included and they were no longer disappeared. And because it was on Zoom and it was interactive, they could play a full part. And that's something that came out quite strongly. By having interaction, it means people can take part. If you live stream a service and all you're doing is broadcasting it out and not having any of this conversation, like we're having a conversation now, we're having messages coming through on the chat, we've had some, if people wanted to, we've had some personal greetings going on, that's good. But if you just send it out like TV with no interaction, just broadcast, it's not the same. Look at this second quote from participant 34, who runs an online church for people with disabilities. It's called You Belong. So if that applies to you, do go and have a look. We do art, we do Bible studies, we pray. It's just lovely. Lots of online chatting. It seems to really bless people. So online can really help, but make sure it's not just projecting out to people in a one way. Rachel's commented, when lockdown happened, people joined my world. Thank you, Rachel. So, leadership really matters. And I heard, and leaders' language really, I'm going to stop there because I've just seen a comment from Rachel. When lockdown ended, I asked if we could continue online, but the tech guy said no, as it might encourage people to stay at home rather than attend in person. Oh, yes, we had several quotes like that. Gosh, somebody was told, stop being lazy lying on your sofa watching the live stream and come back into church. You can imagine how that made the person who had an illness and was unable to cope. and their live stream, I think, was stopped. So leadership matters. What you do with live streaming as a leader, absolutely, but also your language, and this is key. I'm quite used to people saying, stand if you can, God doesn't mind if you don't, or something like that. We say that in our church at the beginning of services. And you can see participant S46 found that really helpful. But it's more than that. If you say something like that, it's helpful for people with disabilities, people who are old, people who are tired, but also people with invisible disabilities. Participant P17 said, it makes such a difference. My vicar tells me if you want to sit down, just sit down. So your language matters. And others said, there's one lady who said, I could manage 10 minutes of church, but I might need to leave after 10 minutes. I might be able to do longer, but I haven't been back to church since I got long COVID, because I feel if I go into the building, I'd be expected to be there the whole way through. And so I haven't bothered. And others have said similar things. One church leader actually, at the back of church, I think they cleared out some pews, but they actually put some old sofas there so that people can lie down, and they can come in and lie down at the back, and that's absolutely fine. So there's a lot of chat happening. So there's one other thing about leadership. P17 had a leader who didn't believe that ME was real, was really horrible to somebody with ME. So P17 didn't ever tell that vicar that they had ME, but they had it so badly that they actually got made redundant from work because they couldn't do the work. And then they got a new vicar with lived experience, not of ME, but of something else, who was much more understanding. And they told me what a difference it was, that they now feel heard. They were able to say, yes, I have ME. Big discussion happening in the comments about online. So I'm just going to have a look. Yep. Many people saying that, Christine's saying, people join my world and I miss live interactive online services. Yes, it's the interaction, isn't it, Christine, that makes a difference. Madeline's saying we have a weekly Zoom church. Many people are involved, valued and popular. Many very special for those who, for whatever reason, can't get out. Brilliant that you're doing that, Madeline. Alison was saying there's a lot of discussion about online being second best. When lockdown ended, everyone was desperate to get back to normal. But of course, the normal excludes those with invisible illnesses. Yep. Sarah says we've continued online streaming, but chat between streamer and people watching live. Yes, absolutely. So that some sort of interaction, some sort of welcome, I think is quite important, isn't it? Right. So let's keep going. Church could be. There were some wonderful descriptions of what church could be. It could be, and participant 55 described their church: strength and weakness, beauty from brokenness, growth from suffering, great capacity from incapacity, the upside down kingdom. Participant P24 was longing for more welcoming, more joyful, more like Jesus. Now I have a couple of pages in the dissertation. I mean, I could have written about 10, which I need to open, just of what this could be like. Let's see. Just getting there. So, in this church, the church could be pain and fatigue are accommodated. People are open and honest about their struggles. They're free to turn down requests. Others are kind. The church gives support, love and prayers and values people. People notice flares and pain, because actually invisible illnesses are not invisible. I think unseen is what they are, because I can see often when people a flagging or have a flare, because I'm used to it. I've been trained for 34.5 years. So there should be come as you are without judgment, with relationships a sense of community. It could be very healing. People are known and feel they belonged. Language is chosen carefully, and people model not standing all the time. You can join in different ways, different groups in different ministries. There's sofas, there are chairs with arms on. Some services are gentler, more relaxed, less noisy, shorter without tiring interaction. Perhaps a cafe-style service lets people pop in and out. Preaching is bite-sized with bullet points to help limited attention spans, and it explores things like chronic illnesses. Pastoral care means that missing people are noticed and they're called. Homebound participants are visited, perhaps with songs, a short passage, a brief discussion and some prayer time. There's disability awareness and inclusion training. Disability theology is included in discussions and teaching to broaden perspectives and raise awareness. Preachers have input on disability and liberation theologies, and questioning is welcomed. People are more open about loss, supported by liturgy and worship involving lament. One of the priests said it often comes back to the Eucharist, around that idea of brokenness and wholeness together somehow all at once. Psalms are used, so bringing lament and difficulty into worship, so people are fine to be unhappy or cry in church. Church acknowledges that suffering is real for many and preaches on this. People sit and listen to others going through hard times. People love well and support each other. Yep. And so on. And also, because COVID is not yet over, the environment is safe for all with good air quality, and people are encouraged to stay away if they're sick. Perhaps a space for masking is offered, with interactive live streaming for those who can't attend in person. Whatever the tradition, people feel valued and loved, and that people genuinely care. The church is friendly, perhaps quirky, sometimes wounded, but wonderful. Right, if you like those are in the dissertation, so just let me know and I'll send you a copy. Yeah, whoa, lots of chat. I'm just going to catch up with those. In fact, I'll get rid of the slides. I'll come back to it. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so lots of things. What's the new norm? The new normal. It's I think people how things are now. Madeline, I think. Let's go through. Sarah's vicar says, stand up or sit down, whichever is most comfortable for you. That's great. I'm sure that helps, Sarah. Alison's volunteer tech guy was burnt out editing online service by spring 2021. So you installed live streaming because that's very important for those who can't get to church for any reason. Sarah talks about lots of pain sitting on chairs and pews. Christine says, you're so right. What an important insight. Invisible illnesses aren't actually invisible. They are unseen. Thank you. Yeah. That really hit me. Alison says, perhaps we all need to hear a sermon on spoon theory. Absolutely. And why not? And lots, there's so many people in churches who have disabilities. It's the one thing that we're probably all likely to get if we live long enough, if we're lucky enough to live long enough. If you want a copy of the dissertation, Anna, do just send me an email. If you reply to the one, I know it said do no reply, just reply to that and it will come through to me. Madeline says, are people aware that the data collection does not have a method for collating data on attendance of virtual services? Right, I am in touch with the Church of England disability team. I will feed that back to them. Thank you for that. Right, so I'm going to do a little bit of analysis next, or show you the analysis I did. Let's move on to that. So you can see some of the theology, because so far it's been very much input. So this is the framework that I used. I brought in some theology, social psychology, leadership and anthropology. It doesn't get very technical, but let's have a look at a few of these. So one thing that emerged as I was going through was that culture is part of this. You know, the doing being so much more important than being, and the individualistic nature of our culture, it's appearing in church and showing up in those themes. I use something from social psychology called social identity theory. That's a big name, but actually it just means that people tend to group people who are different, and you can have in groups who are the people who are similar, and then the people who are different often are pushed out as an out group. They can be stereotyped and stigmatized, and I think I've seen that happening even in churches. I looked at exclusion. There's a book by Wolf on exclusion to embrace. He was actually looking at the exclusion due to fighting in the Balkans. It was written in the 90s, and the sort of hatred across different ethnicities. And some of that was really interesting, and I'll show you a quote of his in a little while that I think really applies. I looked at Imago Dei, which is Latin for the image of God. What does it mean for a person to be made in the image of God, and how is this impacted through what we're seeing with this invisible illness? What's happening to people? I looked at what does inclusion really mean? Actually, is inclusion what's important, or is it real belonging? And then key, and I will look at this next, is the body of Christ. The body of Christ used in 1 Corinthians 12, for example. We are meant to be equal across difference. And how can we model that? Because we're not really now. So I hope that's not been too deep. Let's just look at a couple of things. I love this quote from Swinton. To be included, you just need to belong. But to belong, you need to be missed. If people are disappearing and nobody's noticed, they didn't belong and weren't included. Wondering what you're thinking of these quotes. Do pop things into the chat if you've got any comments. This, I think, is key. The body of Christ. And this is 1 Corinthians 12. Now I'm having to write this with my I'm writing this with my trackpad, so it's not as neat and tidy as it might be. So what are some of the key things from that passage? There is no hierarchy in the body of Christ described in 1 Corinthians 12. In Greek and Roman society, they often use metaphors like this of bodies, but they always had a hierarchy of organs. This doesn't. The fact it doesn't is significant. Nobody is more important than anybody else. This body is a body of equals. So no hierarchy is one thing. It talks about weaker are indispensable. But before you start thinking, oh, weaker means those with illness, actually that Greek word can be translated to mean somebody with less willpower to resist temptation. So perhaps somebody was weaker, not because they had an illness, but because they were more likely to head off, to go and cram themselves with the latest yummy treat or whatever it might be. This next thing comes across really strongly as well. All are conduits of divine love. So, whoever you are, everyone can share God's love with others. And so what comes out of that is that disabled people should be able to play a part in ministry, but a part that suits them. They should be able to share their gifts from God to the rest of their community. So we shouldn't just be trying to include people. I think we need much more. We need people to be equal parts of the community, ministering to others as well. And the other thing that's key in this passage is that if one suffers, all suffer. There is no concept of surgical removal of dodgy organs and chucking them away or abandoning. People should not disappear from the body of Christ. Okay. Nobody, Christine's just put something in their comments about it's so painful when nobody notices we are gone. And I understand that for church leaders it's really hard to keep track of everybody, but perhaps within the congregation there could be some way of just noting who's not been there for a little while and catching up. Right, okay. So, I did say image of God, so we're all made in the image of God, including those with unseen illnesses and chronic conditions. So let's have a look. There are different ways of looking at the image of God. One is it's about what we do, but actually in my dissertation I said, look, that's not the best way to look at it, because if you say people are showing they're made in the image of God because they do things, then if you can't do things, that would rule you out. Another thing is actually relational. So like the Trinity are related to each other, it's being related to others is important, doing things with others. And so by cutting people off, it's not helping them be who they could be. So church and our community should be a foretaste of the kingdom of God. And then another way of looking at the image of God is Christological, looking at Christ as the image of God. And we know that Christ was weak. Christ was resurrected as a disabled person, still with marks in his hands and in his side and in his feet. So there we go, theology. No more theology, but we do have a quote from Wolf, who wrote about ethnic conflict in the Balkans. He said, talking about the Balkans, the havoc wreaked by indifference may be even greater than that brought by felt, lived, practiced hatred. And when I read this, I stopped and I thought, a lot of this is indifference. It's not hatred of people with invisible or unseen illnesses. It's just indifference because it's difficult. Who cares? Or they're not really pulling their weight. They look well. I'll just ignore them and focus on other things. Wow. I'm going to just come back and have a look at, and we've got some interesting comments in the chat. So, yep. Les is saying, what do we do not to be missed? What do we do not to miss someone? I think we need to have we need to have closer connections, don't we? I know in some churches, people are members of small groups in some way. Lesson saying, a couple grown less active with age set up cake ministry in our church. The congregation are very blessed by this ministry. I love that. How do we distinguish between people who go missing due to illness or life circumstances and those who prefer not to engage with others for many reasons when they ease themselves out? I think we can't. The only way we can know is to ask people and hear from people themselves rather than make assumptions. Right, a few ideas about what churches can do next. Let's head over to those slides. What can churches do? So I've pulled together a few things. So let's model the body of Christ. Oh, I've just realised that I am covering up one of my boxes. So I'm going to move me over so I'm no longer covering. How's that? Pretty nifty, isn't it? Okay, so here are some things we can do. Let's model the body of Christ. We'll need to think how we do that in our particular context. And we need to stop the harm, the physical, the mental, the spiritual and emotional harm. And part of this is education. And I hope part of this webinar and all the things that you're going to pass on to others and all the discussions that I'm having and the publishing and things will help to reduce the harm. When people know, I think it'll be less likely. When people know that actually telling people that if they've not been healed, there's something wrong with them is terribly, terribly bad. It shouldn't be done. It's a misunderstanding of theology completely. We can transform the culture, not just inherit the culture from around us. Is our church individualistic, or do we act as we, as a community? Are we focusing doing over being? And if it's this countercultural, how can we be different? It's going to take hard work. It's going to take being aware as the first step. How can we make rotas more flexible? We've heard some ideas from the chat. How can we treat people the same, whether they have cancer or ME? Don't just do wonderful things to people if they have short illnesses that are scary, like cancer. Things like long COVID and ME need support and love. It may well be for a very long time. We'll see how long in a moment. Keep online interactive sessions if you possibly can to engage those stuck at home. And Facebook morning prayer is wonderful. And if you don't have it in your church, do join in with All Saints of Holy Trinity in Loughborough. And on Thursdays at 8 o'clock in the morning and Fridays at 9 o'clock, I'm there hosting it. And I'd love to say hello and welcome you to that if you don't have it in your own church. But in your own church would be really good. We should explore what church could be and should be. Listen to people and their unique set of needs. That's where, Alison, we do need to contact people and find out, are they easing themselves out or are they actually feeling abandoned? So let's check who's disappeared. Did they actually want to leave? Comment from David, riveting. Thank you so much. I'm really glad you could be here, David. And it's lovely giving back to people who've given me a lot. So let's have a look. And one more thing we can do. You've just seen that Volv comment. Stop being indifferent. Well, I need to move back over to my normal place. Right, I'm just going to shift myself. Meow. There we are. Remember the havoc wreaked by indifference. And let's not be indifferent. So what can we do? What I'm going to suggest is that you put into the chat, into the comments, what ideas you've had for what we can do. Oh, I've covered up the positive picture. Let me move into the middle. There we go. While you're doing that, I'm going to, I've got some data that I can share, some graphs showing things like the proportion of people who are women, the ages, and so on. So I suspect that some of you, if you have unseen illnesses, are feeling tired, this is recorded. You should be able to get to the recording on the same link, and I'll leave it up ongoing. Yep. So I will go into those. I can see some things. Part of the joy of doing is feeling you belong, having a relationship with others that's low. At home, praying or singing alone just isn't the same. Absolutely. So do you remember that participant who wasn't taken Holy Communion because she wasn't elderly? We need to make sure that anyone who needs it is included in the rota for home communion, and not just going through the standard words as quickly as possible, but including people perhaps singing and praying with them and sharing in other ways. Right, I'm going to go into some stats now and some pictures, some graphs around the people who are in my study. So if you are now tired and need to disappear, that's fine. I'll just share some pictures. I'm going to move myself back over. Right. It's going to work. Okay, yep. Some demographic and ratings results. So I use something called to-dos, and I could do all this sort of analysis. So, yep. But I won't go into that. Instead, I'll show you some nice pictures, which hopefully will be much easier to take in. You can see here the age split of those people who answered my survey. So there were some very young people, but most of the people were at the older end of the age range, which is probably what you'd expect. Remember the peak of long COVID? It was in that 46 to 65, and it seems the same with this group. So looking at, yeah, this is really interesting because all of these are predominantly female. These ones, oh, let's make sure I've got the pen. Yeah, these are two people here who are, one's non-binary, one's trans male. So a huge proportion, it was more than 90% were female, assigned female sex at birth. So, and a lot of autoimmune diseases are very female, many more female to male. I think long COVID is 2 or 3 to 1. Lupus is 9 to 1, I think. And I talk a little bit about this in the dissertation, so if you're interested, do ask me for it. I'm happy to send it. These are the different illnesses that were represented. So you can see a big chunk with ME, all of these ones here. But also these ones here had both ME and then long COVID on top, which is a bit of a double whammy. And there's quite a big chunk with long COVID. And then there were lots and lots of others. This one was 2 people here with cancer. The others were individual things that were different. So, yep. More than half had ME. And if you add long COVID in, it's getting on towards 3/4. So there's a lot of it. I'm not saying that this is a representative group. It would be very difficult to get a representative group. Madeline is saying that qualitative research feedback is often more female. Yeah, it's interesting. The proportion who were interviewed, I asked every single male in the survey to join me for an interview, and only 1 responded. So that was really, really interesting. But this is not representative. This is just a set of people who replied. So I'm not saying that this would scale up to the entire church, but I thought it was interesting. As you can see, the length of illness, this is years down the left-hand side. These are years. So the person down here had been ill for 60 odd years. It's a long time. You can imagine somebody getting cancer and maybe having treatments, maybe up to a year, maybe 2 years, but 60 something years with an unseen illness is huge. And there were a lot of people for whom it had been 30 or even 40 years. So yeah, a long, long time people had been ill. When we looked at those with long COVID, it was interesting that nobody had been ill for less than a year. I suppose it took a while for people to actually say, yes, I have long COVID, or for the doctors to say that. And there were people who had been ill right since the beginning, some of the people down here, but then people who had been infected with COVID, say in 2022 or 2023. So it's still happening. How did people attend church? This was how they said they attended church. I actually found out that some people had filled in here how they used to attend church, so maybe it doesn't mean as much. But online was quite important for some of the people in the survey. I asked people on a scale of 1 to 5 how included did they feel in their in their church community, where 1 was not at all and 5 was I am included wholeheartedly by everyone in my church community despite my invisible illness. And I was expecting there might be a sort of bump in the middle, but I found that there's a peak at I'm not at all included and another peak at I am included wholeheartedly. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So yeah, some interesting things coming through. Lowe's saying so much of this not only relates to the person with the invisible illness or that, but their main carer as well. Yes, I'm a main carer, so yep, that resonates. So why are some people not at all included and others are feeling wholeheartedly included? So I then explored that a little bit more, and I looked through the responses, the words, to find out actually, can they attend in-person church or not, and then looked at what they said about inclusion with whether they can include or not. So you can see here it changes, doesn't it? There are many more people. And again, this isn't statistically representative, so this is just within my set of people. You can see that if they couldn't get to church in person, it made a big difference for this particular set of people. I found that really interesting. And then I thought, oh, I wonder if it varies by the illness. So I looked at illness, and Emmy, you can see, you know, was a little bit tilted towards not at all, but there were some that felt completely included. Long COVID had, I mean, these numbers are tiny, they're not representative, so I don't want to be taking too much into it. But again, a lot more of my samples said, of long COVID, said not included at all. Perhaps it's a shock of being excluded when they've been used to being included because they haven't been ill for as long. And the chemotherapy, that's interesting. This is just 2 people, but both of them said 5. They felt completely included, wholeheartedly included by everyone. Just moving out the way. But the numbers are tiny, not statistically representative, but I found it interesting. Let's put it that way. Just some people were interested in the types of church that people went to. Remember, these are all Church of England. Oh, I need to move myself out of the way again. These are all Church of England churches. These are the interviewees only. So there's a mix of rural and urban churches. There were some churches where it says inclusive up here. This meant they said that it was they were either members of inclusive church or talking about it. And I was wondering whether those would be more welcoming of people with unseen illnesses. It wasn't that clear. And various different types. The biggest number described their church as middle of the road, but there were some that described them as Catholic, Anglo-Catholic, some as charismatic, some as evangelical. And then the final one, I thought this is interesting. I'm going to need to move myself out of the way completely. There we are. How welcoming is your church? So on the left-hand side, I asked people who I interviewed, what was their experience of welcome as someone with an invisible illness? So you can see here, it's a real, 1 to 5, quite a mix. I asked the same people how they felt their church would rate themselves on their welcome of disabled people. And in that case, you can see it's much more highly rated towards a higher score. So I found that really interesting. People felt that their churches thought they were really welcoming and were really good with things like wheelchairs and ramps and so on, but actually their experience of welcome was not as good as they thought their church would rate themselves. Okay. Yeah. We've got some interesting things coming up in the comments, so I'm going to just come back. So let's have a look at some of these comments. Yeah, Sarah shared some things other than ME, fibromyalgia. Absolutely, that came up quite a bit as well. Rachel saying thank you for doing this research and praying for everyone and those who care and advocate for them. Alison's brought up a point. Churches are very reluctant to talk about ongoing impacts of COVID. So maybe acknowledging the seriousness of long COVID is hard. It means admitting ongoing risks to all in church. Yes, absolutely. I think society is trying to pretend that we're in 2019 and that COVID no longer exists. That any, I don't think very many people know that there are people getting long COVID and starting off this journey all the time. Les is saying, be properly inclusive and loving, and reflecting what Madeline said earlier in the words of the song, truly cherishing others is the answer. Cherish the joy you bring into my life, says Les. So do carry on with the comments. This is great. What I will do is I'll just pop my contact details up. Do feel free to write. Oh, I don't need to have me on top of me. Let me get rid of that picture. Do feel free to send me an email asking for the dissertation. Very happy to share that. I'm very happy for you to share that beyond to anyone else. Let's keep talking about it. I do have a question, which, in fact, there are some questions that came up before. What can we do? I am speaking to the Church of England disability team. We may have invisible illnesses as a result of this on their next, I think, Q1 2025. It may be their focus for their disability newsletters. Yeah, there are. Madeline's saying that there are wider issues that apply to many marginalised people and groups. Absolutely. Which is, I think, why people were very keen to have liberation theology and disability theology being addressed much more in churches, Madeline. So what can we do? I am talking to the Church Times, who sent me an email saying, send me lots of stuff, and then have gone very quiet. So I will keep going to them. I'm thinking of perhaps it would be good to do something at Greenbelt. So if you know how to do these things, do let me know. Any other publications it would be good to get out there. People have talked about Premier Christianity and various other places. It would be good to get these out. I have to write a chapter next month to go in a sociology monograph, which I think is really funny. As someone trained as an engineer who now has just got an MA in theology. Yep. So there's some things coming through from people. We've got Alice saying individual cups and wafers, great during COVID. Unfortunately, not those individual cups are apparently not allowed by the canons of the Church of England. So returning to common cup is problematic, yes, but remember you can always bypass the common cup and just take bread. That is fully partaking. How can people feel as if they're a valuable part of church when they're too ill to do anything and need a lot of support? It's hard asking, says Alison. Hard asking for help. This is why I think churches need to be more aware and build in support. Alison is different. Alison, we have two Alisons commenting at the same time. Alison saying ongoing risks. There's a need to constantly remind people that these risks continue for those with invisible illnesses or compromised immune systems. Those of us who can need to advocate. Yes, and that's countercultural as well. So quite a lot of this is around culture, doing things differently. Madeline says, congratulations and a big thank you. I look forward to reading more about your dissertation. Absolutely. If you want to have a copy, they were very nice. They gave me a distinction. So thank you so much for everyone who participated. I know some of you are on this session. Yeah. So, oh gosh, Ruth, I have heard people's concerns about catching COVID or viruses in church dismissed as spiritual anxiety. Oh dear. There are harmful spiritual and theological approaches in some circles, including senior leadership, says Ruth. Absolutely. Yes. So I did disability theology as part of my MA. It is not compulsory for for people to do as part of their training. I wish it were. As you say, Ruth, there are harmful spiritual and theological approaches. Yep. I think if you've been close to an invisible illness like this, as I have, and as many people on this will have, then you know what the risk is. So perhaps now some people know why I always wear a mask in church. I'm the second last person. There's also somebody who's a cancer sufferer who wears a mask, and that means that she's not the only one as well. So thank you, Madeline. Yep. So there we are. I think we're pretty much at near the end, so I will just share those details. Explicit permission, e.g. to mask, would be very strong and support so many who are vulnerable. Yes, that's partly why I mask when I'm leading services at the front, so that it's visible as well. But yes, thank you very much for being part of this. Thank you so much for all of those who did the survey or were part of the interview panel. It's been wonderful. You've given so much. Those hour-long interviews with people who were obviously tired and who I knew would be probably doing very little for the next I don't know, days, maybe a week. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here. However you find out about it, it's wonderful to have all the comments and the discussion. I'm so glad that this has been interactive. Very happy to share these slides with my scribbles on them as well if you email me. So do send an email through and I will get round to sending those out. Thank you. It's lovely seeing everybody's comments. I wonder if I can put some of them up. So yeah. Oh, Sneha! I'm glad it's been helpful and you've learnt lots. Yes, I get to graduate on the 9th of January, which is only 30 years after my PhD graduation. Anyway, yep. Right, so I'm very happy to stay around for questions. If anyone has any questions, I'm very happy to ask those. In fact, there were a couple that came in which I can answer now. So one of them was, how will you be able to share your work in the Church of England and even beyond, and how can we support you in maximising the impact of your research to make a difference? I think, Ruth, the answer to that question is please share. I'm happy to do webinars like this. As you can see, I've got the tech. I have the slides. I can, if it would be helpful for diocese or for anyone, do get in touch and we can arrange something. I am talking to the Church Times. I hope they will put something out. They have expressed a lot of interest. And there are other places that I could. So let me know where I can get these out. I'm also going to be hopefully putting in papers to theology conferences as well. And I suspect this probably ought to be a book, because the dissertation didn't really, I had to cut so much because of the word limit. So I think there could be a lot more in that than is in the dissertation. Cheryl then asked, oh, let me see if there are any more. Somebody says, am I furthering my research into other areas? People keep saying, am I going to do a PhD? I already have a PhD, although that was in nanotechnology, but I will carry on the research. I think I would like to look at leaders, interview leaders, and see what they think of this and what their perspective is. Because I teach leadership, and so I can draw on the experience I have as well with that. So another question, are secular groups and society better at inclusion and belonging than the church? the church often does a woeful job for those with disabilities. Ask Cheryl, who has a disability and would know that very well. Yes, actually, that came up a few times in the interviews. There's one lady who belonged to a camera club, and she goes in person because you can't bear to miss it because they are so welcoming. And they sent out a letter asking for volunteers, but they somehow managed to word it so she knew she wasn't obliged to, and that's never happened in church. So yeah, lots more comments coming through. Christine says it would be a very interesting and important book. So if I did a book, it would be an accessible book, not an academic book. Probably a chapter on each of the themes. Bye, Madeline. Ruth wants the book. Lots of ticks. Alison, a librarian. Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Yeah, well, I've done 5 books, so I could probably squeeze out another one. I think I know how to do them now. So, yep. Okay. Any more questions? Otherwise, we can wrap it up and call it a day, or call it an evening. Do let me know. Do this email up here. Where is it? Up there is where you can send things. I may put the dissertation up on the study website, which is still as it was when people did the survey in January. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think what I'll do is I'll leave it open so you can carry on with the comments, but I will disappear. So I'll just leave that visible. And if you want to make any more comments, please do so.